So in this video, I'm going to give some hints and some help on C8P7, the one on the high and low temperatures for different months. Okay. So this is a two-dimensional array. It's the first one we've dealt with. So I think it's important to plan things out on our code. I've mentioned this before, and I don't know that a lot of you are taking advantage of this technique, but you want to be able to visualize what you're working on, and you want to have data that you're going to input so you know what the answer should be. It helps, it makes it easier to reason. Okay. So what I've got here, I've popped up Excel, which I tend to use a lot in order to visualize the data. Okay. So this problem asks us to track the high and low temperatures for some number of months. Okay. So I've just chosen 6 months just because that's less data to type in. In all these programs, you want a reasonable amount of data, enough that it tests that your program's working, but not so much that you have to spend a long time typing. And it's true that any program that works for 6 months will work with 12 months or 80 months or whatever you want. Okay. So again, this is how the data is going to look. Okay. And in fact, I could change the coloration here a little bit because with two-dimensional arrays, we're basically talking about an array of arrays. Okay. So the outermost array is months and it goes from 0 to 5. Okay. At this, so what's in this array? What's at position 0 is the array 45, 5. Okay. And you can kind of see this over here where I'm showing how you would actually have that be entered. Okay. With the curly braces. The 45, 5 is what is at temps 0, at the 0th row. Okay. So that's kind of how the visualization works. And from this, I have something to type in, so I'm not doing random numbers, and I'll be able to figure out all of these things. Okay. Um, so for example, on the average high, there's a function called average in Excel. I can go ahead and select the data. And now I have that my answer from the data I've input is 60. Okay. So when I'm running my program, I can test that to see if it works. Okay. So I think that's an important thing. The same thing for the average low. Okay? And I'm just talking about the average highs because the average lows are exactly the same. You just have to change the wording and change the column number. Okay. So in general, when we're dealing with two-dimensional arrays, we usually have to do two loops to rows and columns. Okay. And you could do it in this case, but it doesn't make a lot of sense simply because column 0, which are the high temperatures, and column 1, which are the low temperatures, are not usually dealt with in sequence. Okay. Now in the get data, you have to enter them both, but there are only two. If we only ever had two of anything, we wouldn't have loops. Looping through two doesn't make any sense. Just do them individually. Okay. And then the others, like the average high and the index high temp, or the average low, or the index low temp, all of those deal with either column 0 or column 1, never both. Okay. So most of these are just going to have one. Okay. So in specking out what I'm going to do for this get data, okay, the get data, I'm going to loop through. So first, I have to initialize my array. Okay, so it's going to be int or double, either way. I mean, some of you did double. The program may say, I don't remember, but I just did ints for simplicity's sake. Okay, so you have to declare an array of 6 and 2. Okay, so that's going to be the range that we have. So that's going to be 6 rows, okay, 2 columns each. Okay, so that gives us valid values from temps 0, 0 to temps 5, 1. Okay, so that's the range we're working with. Okay, so once we've initialized that, okay, we can then on the get data function, we're going to loop through the rows. Okay, so our values there in our for loop are going to go from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so that's where we're going to have a for loop where we're saying for int I equals 0, I is less than the number of rows, I plus plus. Okay, and then for each time through, we're going to ask the user what's the high temperature, and I'm using R as my index value. Use whatever you want. But well, actually I said I, so we could use I here. So if we're using I, the high temperature would go in temps bracket I, that ith row, temps column 0, always column 0. Ask for the low, and it goes in in column 1. Okay, so let me change those to be correct, to be consistent with what I just said. Okay, so for whichever row we're on, that's where we're going to be adding the highs and the lows. Okay, and that's going to go through and make sure that you can get things done. Okay. It didn't ask you to create a print function to print the data, but it's never a bad idea to go ahead and create one. This is kind of a simple example, so you may not need it, but in other problems that we'll do, you want to be able to make sure that the data is being stored correctly. Some of you had data that got really big or really little or whatever reason. So if your input is not correct, nothing else is going to be correct. So I would consider putting that in. Okay. So that's all that the get data is going to do. Okay. Then we have the average highs and the index high temp, and the average low is going to work the same way. Okay. So for this one, we've done sums, we've done averages before. So an average is straightforward. You're going to go through. So for the average high, I'm going to add up all the high numbers, all the high temps. So I'm going to go through the rows. I'm going to add everything in column 0 together to a sum. I'm going to divide that by how many there are, and that's how many number of rows there are. Okay. So that's what I've got here. So I'm going to first declare inside of this function, and all of these functions are going to take the array and the row and the column. Okay. All these functions do that. Okay. And one thing that's weird, we talked about in class, but when you're doing either the function prototype or naming the function in more than one dimension, you have to specify a value for anything except the first in the brackets. Okay. So that can cause some trouble. Okay. So anyway, once I'm here, I have the number of rows, number of columns. Okay. It turns out in this case, I don't really need number of columns. We don't use them because we're not doing 2 loops on these, but it's a good practice to send them anyway. Okay. So I'm going to loop through for the average high. I've declared my sum equal to 0. I'm looping through each month. Every time through, I'm going to add whatever's at that row's 0 column, so that month's high, to sum. Okay, so the first time through, I'm at row 0, so I would add 45 to sum. Then I would add 50, and then 55, and then 60, and then 70, and then 80 as I go through. Then I'm done with that. Okay, so when I'm done, I'm going to divide that total by how many months that there are. Okay, so, and that's being held in our rows column, or a rows constant. Okay, that's all you do. And then this function should return a double, because we could have some decimal places there. Okay, so while the get data is going to be a void function, because we're passing an array, making changes to the array, and the array will be passed by reference and it'll come back to us. Okay, for the average high, we're not going to be changing the array, so it should be a constant in our code. In fact, we're sending it, but we're going to return a number, so that's going to be a double function. Okay, average low works the same way, except we're working on column 1, not column 0. Okay, and then for the index high temp, they want the index of the highest value. Okay, for that, we're going to do the king of the hill algorithm, which we've done before. We do that by assuming that January's high is the highest for the year. Okay, so month 0 has the highest temperature. Okay, so for that, what we're concerned, the index here refers to the month that it's in. Okay, which month? Because for the high temperatures, they're all going to be in column 0. Okay, so I'm going to assume that month 0 has the highest temperature. Okay, I'm then going to go through and check 1, and so at 1, well, 50 is higher, so I'm going to keep track of that. So I'm going to have my high index is originally 0, now it's 1. Okay, go to the next one. Okay, that's higher, now it's 2. Go to the next one, now that's higher, that's 3. 70 is higher, now it's 4. 80 is higher, now it's 5. So this would return 5. as the month with the highest temperature. Okay. And again, that function is going to return an index, which is an integer. So that's going to be an int function. Okay. That's also a constant on the parameter. Okay. So that, and again, the low is going to work the same way, except with the other column. Okay. Where we're assuming that temps 0, 1 is the lowest. And then we're seeing if the new one is lower than that. Okay. And in our case, this highest, so the average high should come back as a 60 if I do this data. The index of the high temp should come back as a 5, and the index of the low temp comes back as a 1. Just, you don't always want to do the boundary conditions just to make sure that your function's working. Okay. So that's the basic idea. So I'm going to give you a brief look at my code. I have this one working, and hopefully this will help you out. Okay, so let's take a look. Let me share that code. Okay, so here's what I've got. And I will say first off that contrary to what I just said, these should be constants. Okay. I'm not going to make that change there, but you should. So the average high, average low, the index high temp, and index low temp should all be constant in sending along the array. Okay. And then again, for consistency, I'm sending along row and column to each of those. And this is where I'm talking about you have to have a value in this second set of brackets. And if there's a third for 3-dimensional, you have to have one there too. Okay. So I went ahead and set, as we should, a constant int row for 6 and constant int column for 2. Okay. So these are my function prototypes here. Okay. And then here's where I'm declaring my actual array. Okay. To be at 6 and 2. The first thing I'm going to do, okay, I'm going to get data. That's the first function I'm going to call. After that, I'm going to do the average high, average low, index high temp, and index low temp. Okay. So let's look at the data, get data here real quick just to see what we're talking about here. So again, there's one loop here. I'm sending along the array. Again, I have to put the column there. I'm having row and column here. Okay. For number of rows, number of columns. And again, these are global constants, so I wouldn't necessarily have to send them along, but it's just good practice. Okay. So again, I'm going to loop through from I equals 0 up to I being less than R, less than the number of rows we have. So I'm going to go row by row, I plus plus. Okay. And I'm going to print out onto the screen month of I plus 1. I plus 1 because month 0 doesn't make sense to most people, where month 1 would. If you really wanted to get fancy, you could turn that into January somehow through an array of array of strings that contains the month names that you could tie it together. But you don't have to do that for this. Okay. So I'm just going to say month I plus 1. Then I'm going to ask for the high temp. The high temp goes into that ith row at position 0, and low temp goes at position 1. Again, since there's just a 0 and 1, I don't need a loop for an inner loop. Okay. So that's the idea there. And then we'll look at the average high. Pretty basic. I'm setting my sum equal to 0. I'm going to go through from, again, I equals 0, I less than R, I plus plus. And then I'm going to do a sum plus equals every item, every row's high, which is at position 0, column 0. Okay, so look at I0. Okay. When I'm done, I'm going to just return. I could do a separate variable if you want, but I can just return the sum divided by R. Okay. And then the average low works the same way. The average high temp, a little bit more to it. I send in the same things. Okay. I assume that the highest one has the index of 0. So I'm assuming that January is the highest. Then I'm going through from I equals 0. And I could actually start at I equal 1 here. Okay. I'm already assuming 0, so I can start with 1. And I'm going to go up to R, and I'm going to do I plus plus, and I'm going to check to see if if the next row, if its value at 0, the high value, is greater than the array's value at the high index at that same 0. Okay. If so, I've got a new high index. Then I just return that high index. Okay. And the low works pretty much the same way. Okay. So to run this, sure I haven't mucked it up anywhere, which one never knows what one has done. So let me compile it again. C7.exe and C8 E7 CPP. Okay, looks like it's okay. Do a /C8 P7 dot exe. When I run it, okay, now it's going to ask, and I've got it on my screen, but you can't see it, the data we just did. So the high for month 1 was 45. The low is 5. For month 2, it's 50, -10. For month 3, it's 55, 7. Okay, and then it's 60, 25. It's then 70 and 37. And finally, it's 80 and 45. Okay. So now from this, it says that the average high is 60, which we had calculated over on the Excel to be 60, and that's correct. Okay. The average low we didn't calculate. I will verify it real fast. You're not going to see it. I'll just see here. So I'm copying that over, pasting it. And it says it's 18, which is correct. Okay. The index of the highest temp is 5. And we saw that before, that it's this last one is the 80. Okay. The index of the lowest temp is not 0, it's 1, because it's month 2, which has index of 1, that has the lowest number. Okay. And that's it. So hopefully this will help you to work out any bugs that you're having with your code. Okay. And again, it's important that you not just that you get this working and get the points. The point is that you understand what's happening. These concepts are important as you move forward in your programming career. Okay. So if you have further questions about this, make sure you let me know.